It still says it's trying.
We're good? Sure. Okay. So before we get to the presentation, we had some update yesterday from Robert W. Baird, who handles all of our financial advising. And they have what's called a budget forecast model. And the biggest part of that is money from the state. And so I'm going to have Jesse talk a little bit about enrollment, because resident, and then I'll talk more about the finances tied with those. But you can, if you just want to talk a little bit, wherever you'd like, whatever you'd like.
I'll just sit here. That's fine. Okay, so a lot of people don't know that each year all public schools in the district or in the state of Wisconsin have to do what we call pupil counts. We do those twice a year. It's always the third Friday of September. It's always the second Friday of January. So the first count date, it's an important day for public school districts' budgets throughout the state because the membership count is a significant variable in determining a school district's budget for the following year. So the pupil count is then converted into full-time equivalencies, and it's used in calculation of a district's revenue limit and equalization aid. Heather stuff. So this year, we reported a total of 626 students for our membership count in September. But the fun doesn't stop there. We do it again in January on the second Friday, as I already mentioned, with the added fun bonus of having to reconcile the data. So we have to make sense of all the students that moved into the district, moved out of the district, had a residency change. A lot of different things come into factor for that, but that ending number will also affect the budget for the next school year as well. So as I mentioned, in September, we calculated 626 FTE students for our membership count. In January, we reported 637. So on paper, that looks great. That's 11 students in a positive to our school district for funding. But it's important to remember those numbers are really fluid. It's all based on school families moving in and moving out. So this year we had a positive 11. Last year we had a deficit of 4. So it's used largely in the school budgeting factoring, but it's very fluid. So that's just a little bit of what membership does.
And we use membership. Basically, whatever our third Friday count is, that's what we put in for the next 5 years, knowing that it's never going to be 603 again. She said 626 by the time, so that factors in summer school. And 4K kids account for 0.6 FTE, not one full-time FTE.
And the 603 is the 3-year rolling average.
Right. The other part is you don't get paid if we have 626 kids this year. We don't get state pupil amount for all of those. It's based on 3-year rolling average. So schools that are having declining enrollment don't get a big hit in 1 year. It's tied over those 3 years. So we do put those numbers in though. The second January count, as soon as Jesse uploads those, they go to the state, they get it certified, and then it goes to Baird, and then they put it in our budget forecasting model. So that helped.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So last week, it was 26 new students was the number was given.
Yep. So that doesn't count the students who left though.
So we really are not gaining 26.
Not gaining 20.
We're gaining, I'm just going off the conversation. So we are literally looking at just 11 additional, not 26 additional.
Correct.
So it's half.
That's why it's fluid. You know, we always have.
I know, I
students
understand
moving
it's
out.
fluid. I just can the numbers in my head when we're basing this on. Okay.
Yeah.
And that number I shared last week was just at the elementary school. So it didn't account for any students who had left.
Okay.
All right, so those are some things that we think are just important for our conversation tonight. But let's talk about what we're here tonight is to say, what are we going to do next? So first of all, if the referendum is successful on April 1st, which looking at the audience, I think everybody in here probably thinks, yes, this is the preferred outcome. So referendum is successful. What does that do? That brings back technology, hardware, and software budget. So we can keep one-to-one initiative live. Bring back early childhood through 12th grade curriculum resource team and cycle. That's in there. Bring back field trips for students. Bring back teacher and department supply budgets. Work with teachers on developing a competitive, predictable, and sustainable salary schedule. Work or without major changes in public school funding, go back to the operating referendum in 2030 and 31. This is important to know. Remember, we went with a non-recurring referendum, which means at the end of the 5 years, we will have to go back, or you'd be looking at $2 million budget cuts. But we had talked about that, just want to make sure everybody knows. Yes, and if this passes, in 5 years, we'll have to go back.
Barring nothing changes.
Barring nothing changes in
Yeah.
state, yeah.
Correct. Okay.
In state finances. So this is the successful 5-year referendum. We look at a few different lines, the surplus or deficit, that's what we're looking at, all black numbers, not red numbers. We want to have a fund balance that's always around 22%. So you see it goes to 22.08, 22.48, 22.84, 23.53, and 21.86. So it's always around that 22. And then with this change in enrollment, the biggest change is looking at the mill rate and what that did to the mill rate. Okay, so if you look at last year's mill rate, it was 977. Okay, this year we had a failed referendum, it dropped down to 932. If it passes next year, the mill rate will be at 970. So it's 7 cents less than it was last year. Remember, the board, you guys made a conscious decision to phase in that referendum. So bring back some things in year 1, some additional things in year 2 to make it easier for the taxpayer. So it's a bigger hit. In fact, if it passes, it will be 7 cents less than last year. Then it goes from 970 up to 1051, and then it's a little closer to 1073. You get out to year 4 and 5, it's hard to predict that. We have $11.1125. So those are the mill rates for those next years. So those are the things that we really look at. And again, this is using 603, but we did put in the numbers from January. We can't see that up here because that's just how the summary page
This
works.
is only showing that 603 is only the September FTE count. And the other thing I just want to mention, in January, when we did have the January Friday FTE count, the model that was presented for a successful referendum was showing $10.07 per mill rate. So the mill rate, I just want everyone to understand, just that one change, it dropped 37 cents off the mill rate for taxpayers.
There's an extra slide in our packet that you didn't show there.
Can I see it?
Be able to continue all programs and services that we currently provide.
This one, I must have hit it twice.
Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I must have hit double
I
click.
think that's an important one.
Yep.
For people that are here.
So going back, other things the referendum does, be able to maintain current class sizes, continue all programs and services that we currently provide, and then bring back one teacher and a support staff member each of the first 2 years from the cuts that were made last April. And then meet fund balance policy and be financially stable for the next 5 years, as that's what our current model shows. So those are all the things that happen if the referendum does pass, which we all hope it does. That's one we just talked about. So what we're here tonight for is, what if it doesn't? We really have two options. We can continue to make cuts each year, or we can just not make cuts. If you're wondering how that is possible, let's talk about it. So option 1, make cuts each year. So advantages, disadvantages, really kind of the pros and cons. This keeps the school open longer. This is changed due to increased enrollment, which we talked about. It's based on your fund balance. Where is your fund balance? How long can you continue to not make major cuts and still use your fund balance? Okay. The disadvantages of making cuts each year, it decreases programs, increased class sizes and services for students. Raises the risk of losing highly qualified staff, and it could reverse our positive open enrollment trend. We were talking about this today at our admin meeting, and we get a lot from open enrollment. And one of the questions that both Jason and Chris are getting a lot is, well, what do you think is going to happen this next referendum? Are we going to lose any programs that we might be coming here especially for? And so that's a concern that we have, is open enrollment. We've turned this into a place where people want to be. And by cutting programs and cutting services, we're less likely to have those people say, that's a district that I want to be at. So that's one option. The other one, do not make cuts. If the referendum does not pass, and we say, you know what, we're going to keep all of our programs and services for students. How can we do that? by using fund balance. And there might be some years where we can do that. But remember, the fund balance, once you deplete that, then you don't have any left. So like, how much can we go? Disadvantages: without making cuts, the fund balance would eventually run out. I think everybody knows that. This approach would cause short-term borrowing at some point. We used to have a policy that says around 20% of our fund balance, and we got awfully close to having to use short-term borrowing. So if we go this route, just know that that would have to come back to the board, and you'd have to allow us to use short-term borrowing, and we have to pay some interest on that. And eventually, if you run out of your fund balance, this is what Mauston was looking at. It's called dissolution. When we look at our updated information, that is much farther down the road than it was last week based on new information. So this is if the referendum failed. Some other things is still using 603 as our resident number. Okay. Looking at this, the deficit for next year, we're expecting this also does not have any, this just says what we did this year, we're doing next year. So this does not have salary increases at all either for any staff. So this says right now we're expecting a deficit of 114,000 for next year. With our fund balance a little over $2 million, that's something the board at this point can look at and say, okay, is this something that if the referendum does fail, do we want to use fund balance for a year and go for another 12 months and try to pass another referendum in April of 2026? Because I think from board conversations, from teachers conversations, from admin meetings, I think those three entities, staff, admin, board, we're not going to give up on our kids. We're going to keep coming back to referendum because we need it. And the cuts that we're looking at are not good for kids. And I'm taking that based on all of our conversations at the board. You heard from our teachers. I don't think our community is going to give up on our kids. So what does that do to our fund balance? Okay, we go from 22.03 at the end of next year. With this, it would be 20.05. Okay. Now, looking at this saying, can you really offer staff a 0% pay increase 2 years in a row? That's a gamble, because that's not a normal thing in education. So we have looked at this and said, okay, for about every half a percentage point, okay, so if we wanted to give a 1% pay raise, for every half percentage point, it would be about $30,000 roughly. We don't have a model built on that. That's just our napkin math says that's about how much it would be. So if we had a 1% raise, it would be add 60,000 onto that 114. That's not a decision we have to make tonight. It's just I wanted you to know the information for the rest of the conversation. So fund balance at the end of year 2 would be 20.05. Fund balance at the end of year 3, or actually it would be year 1 at the end of next year would be 20.05. Then it goes down to 15.48, 9.48, 1.71, and then we get in the negative during 29 and 30. Again, those are based on our current enrollment that was updated yesterday.
So Aaron, that's the numbers if we don't make any cuts and we deplete the fund balance.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
What if, I mean, you're getting to this, I'm trying to get ahead of myself. So how long if we have to make cuts? Like, can we keep making cuts? Do you know what I mean? Eventually we can't make any more cuts because there's nothing
You get like option 1 is make cuts each year.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any of us look at that list of budget cuts right now that we'll get to and think, oh, this is an easy one.
Right.
Everyone is going to impact kids. Everyone is going to have other people come in and say, ooh, if you had this program, maybe we consider it, but maybe we go somewhere else. And the other thing is, this is what communities do. Our cities and our villages, Keeler, Dickeyville, Cuba City, they're heavily investing in residential growth. And in Keeler, that started a long time ago, right? So there were 80 or so lots up there. And now what's happening? We're seeing some increased enrollment. Okay, probably some families moving in there with kids. We're going to have a lot more enrollment. So the communities are doing their thing. Now we've got to be able to say, yes, come here, move and live here, and we'll provide a quality education. And we're not going to have a quality education by continuing to make cuts. And I don't think anybody up there wants to quit. I know nobody back here wants to quit on our kids. We're going to keep going. I know some districts have said, oh, we're going to, referendum fatigue in our community. We're going to take a cycle off. Well, if that harms our kids for a year, I don't think a lot of us want to do that. So I think that's really important to know. But communities do this. The community has invested. They want to grow. They have all this infrastructure put in. And now we've got to be able to match that. We've got to do our part, provide the best quality education for those people. So what do we want to do tonight? First of all, I think the easiest option is to pass the referendum, financially speaking. Okay, bring back important student services, provide financial stability for 5 years, knowing that we will have to come back in 5 years. Because once you get in that non-recurring cycle, like Benton did that as well, the school district of Benton, is every 3 or 4 years they go back and they pass those. Or do we want, but if it fails, we want to make cuts. We'll look at the financial aspects of that, or not make cuts. And it's really based on where the fund balance will be. Looking at it here, I would say every year when we copy the budget over from last year to this year and then kind of make the increases, almost every year we have to cut somewhere around $250,000. Now, some of that is, we bought this year. We don't have to, that was a capital item. We don't have to buy that. We don't need that service this year. We could reduce some of those things. But remember, that's going to be a little tougher next year because we've already made $1 million worth of cuts. So it's going to be a little tighter. So if you decide to not make cuts, what would likely happen is we would present a non-balanced budget. We would just know that we're going to be using some fund balance. But we would be able to keep all the same programs and all the same services for 1 year. The next year, remember, it jumped up to $300,000 and some thousand. That would be more difficult. But we'd have another cycle where we're not going to give up on the kids, and we would go for another referendum.
Having been faced with this a number of years ago prior to your administration, we had asked administration, what going to an operating referendum, what would we cut? And the list sort of looked like what you've got here, things that we really didn't want to cut. And at that point in time, we did make the decision that we said we would cut those if it failed. I wouldn't want to go there again because I don't want to risk what you just said, is saying, if you don't pass the referendum, we're going to do this, because that's going to destroy the education, quality that I would like to retain. So to me, there's no doubt we proceed with the referendum, hope it passes. And if it doesn't, we don't make cuts. We use the fund balance and we figure out what kind of pay increase we could give, because we have to give something.
So I have a couple questions. So looking at the potential budgetary cut considerations, clearly they're concerning because those go away, kids will go away. I pretty much can guarantee that. These considerations, I'm sure we've talked about at different times. I feel like, again, I know those are only considerations, right? That we need to also come back and maybe look at this again, because I really want to really look into, are there cuts that we have not considered or made that are not directly impacting the students? And my gut tells me there might be some conversations that could happen, because these here 100%, like, not secondarily or not indirectly affect the students. They are the students, where the students go. We're talking classes. So we might not even go that route, and I'm hoping we don't. I hope we have whatever direction we go. But if we are going to look at cuts, I want to really, as a board, come back together and really look at these cuts. Because one question I had, and Aaron, you don't have to answer this now, but as we talk about different things and services we're utilizing, I hear Baird being utilized for financial pieces. And I know we've got two very skilled people in those positions, between you and Heather. So my question is, what are we paying Baird and why are we paying Baird? You know, so things like that. I just want to make sure that we are having all that around the table.
So I can answer that question.
100%.
We pay Baird $4,000, that's it.
And he does the financial.
So it's Baird is the company, so Baird, that $4,000, it gives us access to the model. And then we have some consulting hours, but that's it, it's $4,000 for this model.
Okay,
So if we take that $4,000 away, I guess I would ask the question, what am I using to forecast the financials of the district? I feel like $4,000 is very, very inexpensive. If you look at our entire budget, that's very, very minimal cost.
appreciate the feedback. I just wanted to understand what it was. When we go Baird and we talk about financials and we talk about getting information from Baird and we're getting numbers from Baird, what does that mean? And what does
So
that
they
involve?
just send me an email. They don't actually update. I have to update the model. So they just send an email saying to all of their clients saying, here's what you need to do. You can do this or you can do this. There's multiple different ways you can make updates so that you just have to follow their instructions and make the updates.
That's what I needed to know, because those kind of questions are gonna continuously come up,
Yep.
and we can make sure we can address them.
And
So-
Heather, you've touched on, sorry, I'm
No.
stepping you. You've touched on this before, but there's a significant amount of school districts throughout the state
So
that use
half of the
Baird.
school districts use Baird or approximately half, and the other one uses
I think, is it PMI?
PMI, yeah.
It's
So
some acronym.
It's basically a program model. It's not a consulting firm that we bring in that does all of our decision making for us. Like that's done with you guys.
No,
No.
we might consult with them to say like equalized evaluation. Let's just talk about that one. We talked about that one today in the admin meeting. I asked them like, hey, our equalized evaluation it's normally before inflation, it's normally averaging 6%. The last few years, it's been like 10, 12%. If you look at these models, that's where it's been at. They will say, do not use even 6%. We budget very conservatively for a reason. And so they were like, be between 2 and 4. So like that's the kind
They
of
input and question.
Yeah.
Perfect.
yes.
If
And
I'm talking
ultimately have like we still make the decisions, but we just like bounce ideas, so to speak, like off of them.
If I'm talking louder, I'm sorry, but people said I gotta talk louder in the meeting, so.
No problem, no problem.
I feel like I'm like
That's all right.
dirty my voice.
No problem. Good question. So some things we talked about is at our last meeting, you said, okay, what are the things that have been considered already? That's athletic equipment supplies, paraprofessional hour reduction, not middle school, music department consolidation, library media specialist consolidation, art education consolidation, fitness center director position, district cell phones, required event workers, and CTE program, that's business, ag, family, consumer education, technical education. Those have been considered before. Exactly what you guys said before. A program means that's not around anymore, and then we're going to lose kids in open enrollment to kids who enjoy that. Other cuts that other schools that have run referendum just have used, cutting freshman sports at high school, limit the number of JV and varsity non-conference games for all athletics, discontinue in-town transportation for first through third graders, discontinue Cuban care on Friday, discontinue community-based 4K kindergarten. So those are just things that we've seen on other schools have considered, or things that maybe that we could look at. Are there any specific items though that you guys, if you want to make cuts and you say, yep, I want to see kind of the numbers on these 3 things, or you guys might say, I see the numbers, we're going to go ahead without making cuts, but maybe here are some things that you just want us to look into. So that's what the rest of the meeting is today. There was one of that's this part of it, because we've got other discussion items on there, but this is the main part of that. So are there any other board suggestions, that things that you want to add to this list, or any of these, like these were just ideas that other schools have used. Are there any that you want to see numbers on Thursday, knowing that Thursday doesn't give us a lot of time, but we'll do our best to get these numbers?
I guess more of a clarifying question. Because I don't want to see any of these happen, but I know we've had a lot of conversations around the community-based 4K. I think that's a wonderful partnership for us. But part of that conversation was also the potential to go back to half-day options.
Mhm.
Can you kind of just refresh me on where would that be a part of this conversation as well, to go back to a half day or a part-time 4K? And what that impact might look like with transportation and everything?
Transportation is really the part that makes it not as financially advantageous as you think, because you're gonna have you're gonna have those morning routes
Extra
to pick
buses.
kids up and then to take them home in the middle of the day. And those routes are pretty expensive, so it negates a lot of that.
So Aaron, are you asking, are you asking that if we're gonna talk about potential cuts, I mean, or should we first decide if we're even going to be going this direction?
What
Is
does
that-
the board want, which
I know that's
direction
what I'm
does the
trying to
board wanna
understand
go?
clarification
Yeah.
with that, because it seems like if we're not gonna go to cuts, and I really don't want to sit around and talk a lot about cuts.
I'm in agreement with that, and I'm in agreement with what Gary said. To me personally, I think we need to go the way to make no more cuts. Go with the fund balance problem.
And just advise us to budget that.
And see where it goes from there.
I think we would cross that bridge, Tangi, if it doesn't pass, and, you know.
That's why
I
I'm
guess
asking.
in another day, but I guess you raise a good question, and is the board just by a nod, a show of hand, are you in support of not making cuts and proceeding with a referendum that would, postpone, hopefully, the possible discussion on further cuts?
Another wrench I can throw in there to make it more difficult for you guys. We might get to a point before our annual meeting this summer where we have some preliminary budget numbers and we share those. And we might get to the point where you're like, okay, maybe we're at 180,000. And you guys say at that point, okay, Aaron, we want to present a budget that doesn't go over 125,000. So try to present a budget that goes there without making personnel cuts or things like that. Just tighten some of those. So that is an option too if we wanted to trim a little bit. It is going to be harder, like when you already lost 10% of your budget, to make some of those. But those are decisions that we make throughout the summer and get leading up to the annual meeting too, so that we can have some direction there. So if that helps you make today's decision, know that that's an option.
So right now, based on the forecast model, we will be able to sustain, if, we're all saying big if, because we do not want this to happen, if the referendum does not pass. So we don't necessarily have to make any decisions to make any cuts for the 25-26 school year.
If we're okay using around 200,000 of that fund balance.
I'm asking the board,
So our fund balance would drop to 20%, if not a little.
Probably, yeah, a little lower.
We
Yeah,
probably,
little lower.
if you're gonna
Yeah.
give salary
That's-
increases,
yep.
it'd be lower than that,
Yep.
so the board would likely, we would, if it drops to 18%,
And
we would have to do short-term
And
borrowing.
Is
for sure.
short-term borrowing required at that point, or would we still be able to utilize, to avoid the short-term borrowing at that point?
We wouldn't be able to make payroll likely in December at 18%.
And maybe November.
And maybe November.
Can you
Because
just
then
say
we
that
were
one
at-
more time loudly?
We likely would not be able to make payroll in December for sure at 18%, and likely not in November, and potentially a month or two in the spring, not at 18%.
And that's based on when the
You're
state
saying-
pays us.
When fund balance drops to 18%.
Well, yeah, like,
Yeah.
so this option one that you guys are seeing, that's at 114,000, that's without salary increases, and it's already at 20%. So if salary increases are added to that fund balance percentage is gonna go down. And the board would have to approve short-term borrowing pretty early in the summer. We can't it's not something like you can throw, like, I can't just call the bank and say, hey, we need money. It has to be approved by the board, so we would have to do it early summer.
I think that the tough thing, and I think that's tough for me, let alone everyone else, is $2 million sounds like a lot. Maybe to some people, why do you even have to go to referendum? Well, the problem is, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't get our money except for a couple times a year. And when she's referring to December, in essence, our money our fund balance looks more like 0 than 2 million. So we'd have to borrow to make the payroll. She might get her money in January to replenish and be able to pay back that short-term borrow. But that's what we're talking about.
We get a large check we get some state aid in December, but it's not like you get it December 5th every single year. You get it early December. We have a December 1st payroll, plus then we have weekly check runs. So I could, instead of doing weekly check runs this coming December, I probably will have to hold checks and only pay like our officials, and we might even have to, like retirement. That's a very large bill every month. And it's the November retirement is due in the month of December. So I might be able to, we would incur a fee, it would be a small fee, but we would incur a fee if we did pay that retirement until January. But then in January, we have checks coming in from the municipalities with their taxes. So I could just delay paying some of our vendors. Most vendors, we don't incur late fees. Most of them we don't, but retirement, Visa, and there's a handful of other ones that you do incur a fee after 30 days.
And I know just, you might not have these numbers and that's totally fine, but are other districts, I mean, do they make it on an 18% fund balance, or is that kind of?
Every district's gonna be different. It depends on your expenses.
Okay.
That's what drives. So if you do any sort of research on like fund balance, or if you were to ask someone from DPI, like, well, what percentage should we be at? There's no right, it's not the same, it's not cookie cutter, it's not the same percent for every single school district. It's different because it depends on what are all your expenses, what revenues are you bringing in, and then again, it's some districts don't have weekly check runs, some only have monthly check runs, so it just depends on like the cash flow.
I was just curious.
So I guess back to, I think, Aaron's question or Angie's question. Where are we at? Are we feeling comfortable proceeding with the referendum? And if fails, we would use fund balance.
I'm a little uneasy with the comment of not being able to make payroll in December and spending more money on being able to do that when we're already struggling. I think about everybody's own finances. You know, you want to have that little nest egg. Like, I don't want to intentionally struggle and then it's going to cost more in the long run. I know the purpose of tonight's meeting is to determine what we're going to cut, but I do think we should maybe comb through and see if we can find something. I know it's not easy. I know we've already done it a million times, but it makes me very uneasy.
Tonight, what we want to say, are we making any program or personnel cuts? You know, if it's okay, we're going to continue each month looking at different parts of the budget that are non-personnel related. We can do that every month, and that's not a problem. But like we've got to give people adequate notice. You know, if it's a person.
I will mimic Sarah's concern, and my thought would be to move forward, as Sarah stated, but we're still looking for keeping our fund balance. I'm going to say 20% and keeping it at that level. So we're going to have to find some cuts, but I don't think program cuts are the answer right now.
Right.
I don't think I think I agree with Angie that there's cuts that we can find that are not going to affect our students directly. And it might hurt for a year, but it's hurt already in different areas. So I feel like the hurt just needs to hurt somewhere else.
I would also think about, you know, we've talked about just the trust of us. So if we're going to referendum and we don't have to make any cuts, like what does that look like just from a cosmetic?
We don't want to be the boy
Right.
that cried wolf because we need help, and people aren't seeing the impact yet. I don't I don't want to sacrifice anybody to say like, yep,
We
this is
did
what
make,
it happened.
we did make $1 million worth of cuts, and we were hoping that
Yeah.
would get us through 2 years.
Mhm.
Like that was the initial hope.
But remember too, the reason the numbers have changed is because of the open enrollment that we just received.
Or
Part of it,
new.
no,
New to district.
New
new
to
to district, sorry,
Yep.
I didn't
Yep.
mean open enrollment, sorry, but new to district, correct, new students, which increased that.
And as Jesse said, that is fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Like last year it went down 4, this year it went up 10. But we're hoping that there's a lot of houses going up. We're hoping that is going to lead to more students. And maybe not in year 1 or 2, but now that we're in year 5 of the Keeler subdivision, maybe a lot of those kids now are school age kids. Are there any other items that you want us to look into off the top of your head, but we can also make this a monthly, thing in our meetings as well. What I'm hearing is you don't want to cut any people or programs right now. Is that right? I think that was. And
That are
a week
directly
ago,
impacting the kids, so they're in.
a week ago, it looked like we might have had to do that, but new numbers and new information have kind of pushed that down the road a little bit.
So if we're at that point,
Mhm.
Aaron asked if we would make this either a monthly agenda item that you would revisit, and maybe as Heather presented the financial report, or I don't know if it's possible to figure out that, I know there's an item there that says if you give, anywhere from 0.5 to 2.5 increase, this is the, the
Expected.
amount that it's gonna cost. What would, it look like to maintain $20,000? I mean, is there in essence, what kind of,
20%? You mean?
20%.
yeah,
20%.
to maintain the 20% fund balance?
Yep.
Yeah.
What figure, what pay raise could you give and do that, or something related to that? If,
So I guess I would want to see a categorical summary somehow of where the expenses are at. Does that make sense? So just to see,
How do you want?
not too detailed, but detailed enough that we can identify.
So no, you don't want to see any personnel line items. Right? Because if we're not cutting personnel, so then you wouldn't see any salary.
I think we
or
still need to
benefits.
see that though, because I think there's portions that could be affected that are in that portion of that return,
Can
of
I-
that report.
I'm just gonna say this, and I'm gonna be as transparent as possible. I have had questions about, are we gonna look at administrative salaries as well? Are we looking at everything when we look at cuts? And so if we're gonna talk cuts, and I think we need to have all the numbers, everything. Custodial, administration, everything. That's my take, because I'm hearing that from the community. Are you looking at, not saying that has to happen, but are you looking at everything? And that's,
What are you saying, cutting salaries?
I don't, just looking at the numbers, where is everything going? Like the full amount, like what is the salaries, what is everybody's?
Well, I mean, that's all, that can easily be found out. Are you suggesting we cut salaries?
I'm suggesting that if we're going to talk about any cuts, that we need to have every cut, all cuts laid out.
So currently, right now on the district website, you can see our full budget. Nothing is like folded up. You can see all line items, all expenses, all revenues. So that is available on the district website. It's under the business office. So you can
Last
see,
4 years or 5 years?
you can see like the last 4 or 5 years, line for line, revenue, expenses. You can see all of that information.
That is tricky to read if you're not familiar with
You're
Woofer.
probably not gonna be able to
You know,
understand it.
It's there, but that's how the report is run.
Yep.
Like you'll have
You
no
would,
funds,
you would probably
objects,
have to go
functions.
look at it's called the Woofer, which is the manual that basically says,
Which item goes to, yeah.
yes, yep. Okay, so back to Julie, so what
Let
do you
me,
want? to
let me
see?
think about this for a second, because I wanna,
Because you can probably create it, just about,
Right.
like which filters. and
right,
which
yeah,
settings.
yeah.
Yeah, I just need to know what account numbers do you want to see? I can pull any report. I just want to make sure I understand what you want to see.
But right now with what we have here, failed operating referendum, this is no salary raise. We end at a 20.05% fund balance at the end of 25-26. So if you were to give a 1.5% raise, which I believe this group feels people are due, that's $205,000 off of that. So that would send our fund balance to $1,817,000, which again, roughly then is 18%, like Heather had talked about. So unless we talk about new cuts elsewhere, that's where we're going to be at. And if you look at the cuts that were proposed, non-personnel cuts, athletic equipment, $6,000, cell phones, $3,400, event workers, $6,400. I mean, we're not even $15,000. So there really, truly is no non-personnel cuts we can make. Unless somebody
That's
comes
gonna
up
make a
with,
difference, Judy.
right,
Yeah.
Again, because 75% of our budget is bodies and benefits.
I mean, we can beat our heads out against the wall all we want. They're just not there
Yep.
that I see.
But that
And
doesn't
again,
mean
personally,
that doesn't mean that if somebody has an idea and they send it to us, that we can't look into it and then report back to it at the next board meeting.
I agree, but tasking you guys to put some list together of numbers that aren't there, I think is a waste of our time. I personally would like to use the fund balance as long as it can. And God forbid it fails, but at least we would get one more year and we could go back again in the following April and ask again.
And then that number, just if that scenario plays out, the referendum number would actually likely be bigger because we'd have to make up for that
Refund that. We would have- we would
$200,000
have to
in the
refill
fund
that number.
balance. We'd have to
Absolutely.
refill that.
Oh, and that's the thing. I mean, even going for a non-recurring is not financially advantageous to us as a school district. So we've already taken it down a notch to go to non-recurring. And then, if we're going to cut other things in addition to the million, we're not even thus bringing any of that back. And we just heard a month or two ago that those were having negative impacts. And I guess so. There's no perfect answer, but I think that just to say, we need to send a positive message that we need the referendum to pass for lots of reasons.
And I'm not a fan of short-term borrowing, Heather, but if we would borrow $200,000 at 5% for a month,
I think that the
we can't
number,
hardly be a couple $1,000.
it was.
It's not going to be,
It was fairly inexpensive when I called and asked the bank. I think it was a couple months ago. You guys had asked, like, well, what would it cost? I don't remember the dollar amount. I just was looking at the sheet the other day, but I remember the percent at the time when I asked was 4.74%, and it wasn't even. It was maybe $1,000. Again, I don't.
Which
I
if
think-
we're just gonna do it a few times.
I think it was. I think it was like 150,000 is what I was asking, or maybe it was even 160 because our payrolls are typically 156, and that's when we're not paying extra duties. So regular payrolls are around $156,000.
thank you.
I don't have to make a motion on any of this.
Nope,
right?
this is all
We just-
discussion.
We just
Motion.
decide to do it because,
This is just,
okay,
this is just, we're just discussing this, what I,
like the plan. like-
yep, of what the
So
board would like to do.
if something were to happen in 6 months, and let's say it doesn't pass, but we're hoping it's gonna pass. And then we have the federal at the federal level, we don't, there's not, whatever, we don't, we're all, so we can come back together and we might have to, at that time, have to have discussions again, right? I mean, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we can always come back and reconvene and be like, okay, now we're in this position. we
There's
didn't-
one caveat with that.
Okay,
If it's dealing with a staff
I
member,
know.
it's May 15th, we have to let them know by May 15th. And in order to have all the paperwork and everything done by May 15th, you
correct.
have to have that done early April.
Yeah,
So anything past May 15th, it really
Yes.
has to be non-personnel related.
okay.
I mean, obviously we'll have a discussion if it should fail,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
I'm just thinking big picture of like, if all of a sudden we don't get some kind of release for something,
Right.
it's a-
Then we'd
Out of
have to
control.
roll that into the April 26th.
Yeah.
Like try to recoup that
Yeah.
from that point. And that's the hard part is, people keep saying, well, we've said no twice,
Mhm.
you're not listening to us. Well, but our kids' needs didn't go away.
Yeah.
And so we'll come back with something different, but the more we use in our fund balance, the higher we're going to need in those first few years of the referendum to replenish that and get us back to where because if you had to use short-term borrowing, even if it's $2,000 each pay period, and we have 24 pay periods, so now you're talking that's 50 grand a year in interest that we don't want to be using.
Well, I understood though, it was only gonna
Only
probably be a
couple
couple
months.
times a year, is that?
That, right.
Can I ask,
If you get in that role where you have to do it though every
It depends how low your
fund
you're
balance.
depleting the fund balance and the timing of the year
Yep.
is going to dictate how often you're gonna have to use short-term borrowing.
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Would, as a staff member, would you rather have a smaller pay increase versus having to talk about cutting a position?
I think that's hard to ask a selective group of people. to
Perhaps,
show up
I mean,
today.
maybe, I just don't know, would the, I don't know what the feeling is
I-
to maintain where we're at, would we, yeah, we don't want to, and we hope it passes, but are,
I
to
think,
consider a 0.5% increase versus a 2%, just to maintain the level we're at, to not go to a point where we're in financial distress, I mean, the short-term borrowing distress, I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I-
guess it's just something to think
I
about.
think that would be maybe something we work with the CCEA on, and is that something that we'd be comfortable?
Well, and I think that's an
Folding
option we have
people,
to at least consider, if, depending on what our goal is for,
well, our goal is to pass the referendum
absolutely,
and give a
but
pay increase of some sort.
So just, and I have a lot of clarification questions, so I apologize, but if the board decides that we're not going to go to any cuts, then I'm assuming in our communications, we would explain why we don't have to do that, right? Because I can see some of the questions being.
Yep.
Why don't you go to cuts now?
We're already writing that in some of our information right now, like, hey, most school districts and especially in southwest Wisconsin have declining enrollment. And we have found that in the last few times, looking at, okay, we're having increasing enrollment. And that trend occurs because our communities have done their job in building the infrastructure. That's great for schools, and that's how communities work together and flourish. And so that's already kind of in there.
And I had a conversation a week ago with Jamie Nutter at CISA 3, and he said, Cuba City, Dodgeville, Mineral Point are the three school districts that are really sitting in a good spot because of the financial and economic situation within those towns. He said, Fenimore, I'm concerned about, for instance,
what were the schools you said, Kid City, Mineral Point?
and Dodgeville.
And he's talking about like the city growth, not so much the school budget. He's talking about like the infrastructure that they're adding to their communities.
And, so I mean, again, he was being positive in terms of, thinking that, and again, we're gonna have a beautiful school. I'd like to have staff and programs to go with it. So that's what obviously is at stake. Anything else? I mean, I think obviously, everything's on everybody's mind, and depending upon what happens, we'll obviously revisit, and basically anybody can have an item added to the agenda just by asking. Or if you want to make it a standing item, just let Aaron know that,
Or just say, look into this and put it in your report. I mean, we can do that
Yep.
too.
or if you've got thoughts and ideas that, things that we really want to seriously take a look at, either the cost, why, feed them to Aaron and Heather and have them report back to all of us.
So I'm looking at Thursday's meeting. It was more like if we're gonna make action tonight or to take discussion today and have action on Thursday. With what you guys just said, do we need to have them? It doesn't sound like we're going to be making any cuts. Do you want to meet on Thursday? In my mind, it was more like, okay, which cuts are we going to look at? Because this personnel people, you have to move quickly with these. If it's non-personnel related cuts that we're going to be looking at, that can be an ongoing thing. And I don't know if we need to meet on Thursday, but it's your meeting. Okay.
Guys, girls?
I just need to stew on a few things here.
You're just chewing on that.
I'm just stewing over here.
Do we need a Thursday meeting? Do you want
I
one?
don't think we do at this point.
No. I
Okay.
would agree.
So everybody's agreeing that at minimum, we're not making any personnel cuts.
Personnel
That's what we're
cuts.
all agreeing on.
Right.
No personnel cuts. Okay, so anything that we're gonna cut.
And so there didn't have to be action on this. It was more just
Yep.
discussion. But if the discussion is saying we don't need to do that, then there's no need
And we
to.
just have to be crystal clear in our communications moving forward as to why that was able to happen.
Yep.
Because it was in the air that it was going to.
And say it. Everybody come to Cuba City. Keep
Yeah,
moving with
yeah.
your kids and come to Cuba City. Okay. So that's good. The next one on here is referendum communication plan. This is just kind of a list of what we're working on. It basically just kind of lays out the month of March. You guys have this. Administratively, we looked at, okay, what are some community events that we can look at going to? When do we want to publish some of our frequently asked question items? We'll work with the communication team on that as well. More, I just wanted to make sure you guys all had that. If you're aware of other community events where you think it might be helpful to go to, let us know and we'll get that on there. So take a look and see, but we might be missing some different things that you think are important. So that was more just a FYI. If you hear of something where it might be good to have one of us, let us know. The next one is addition of school safety items in the referendum with our
Aaron,
recent.
sorry, can I go back to
Oh, go ahead.
communication? At the
Yep.
last meeting, there was talk about trying to do something with businesses. Is that something that we're still gonna like bring in, or was there gonna be, didn't someone say they did like videos or something, a clip, something? I don't know, we were gonna look into some media outlets or something. I wasn't sure where any of that was like at for some reason. They were talking about, didn't they do something for Boston?
Oh,
like
in Boston,
businesses?
they did have
Testimonials
Yes,
from like
thank
a
you.
real estate agent,
Families,
businesses
yes,
of why it's
yes.
important to have successful
Yeah.
school districts.
Yeah,
I just wasn't sure.
Yeah. I know, Chris, you've got a group that you contact, like, is it the Chamber of Commerce? Okay, so maybe that's something that we can look at and see if any of them would be interested in Gene and some of those videos with us, or, if they're supportive of the referendum.
Okay.
Okay. Listen, I'm just gonna write down business involvement. Thank you. Next one is additional school safety items. Recently, we had a school safety concern, and that really made us look at all of our policies and procedures. Jason and I went to a reunification training a couple weeks ago. We do have somebody from the Department of Justice coming this Friday to go through our entire safety plan and give us some suggestions, which if those changes are made, then we would bring back to you guys for approval. But that just sparked a lot of communication. Hey, when we went through that process, what are some things that might be helpful? And we identified some entrances and exits with the hardware needs some help. Some doors don't properly shut all the time with some different weather. We looked at camera usage. Those are the two big ones. Also at the reunification, like we went through the reunification a couple weeks ago, and each school kind of had a tote, and each one of those totes had some tools in there that would make it a lot easier if we ever have to do that. So there were just some communication things that we thought were important. And we looked at the referendum amount and we thought, okay, there are some things here we could trim this a little bit and trim this a little bit and try to get some of those school safety items in there. And we didn't want to put it in there because everything that we put in the referendum, we brought to you guys, you had open discussion on. So before we put that in our communication, we would like to do that. We're asking that we'll try to find where that fits in with the referendum dollars. Are you guys okay with us putting that in there?
Person, if it's safety related, I
Yeah.
would think it's,
Yeah.
that's, yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question though? So with the capital referendum that we have that wish list of if we come in under budget, we can use that for other things. Could some of those costs, not that I want to deprioritize safety, but could some of the costs shift there as well? So it's not cutting 200,000 from something else
Right.
to make
With
that
with
happen?
the FEMA reduction,
Yeah.
that's a reality, is that we
Okay.
may not have as much money left over for additional things as we once thought.
I guess I like that idea. And because we are gonna have some, and I guess the safety would be, as important or more important than anything else in terms of stuff. But, if it was possible, you could put a dollar figure on what that is once you go through that.
Sure, and we haven't
Process.
gotten any bids, like we've talked with camera people and they've kind of, why don't you guys talk? 'Cause you were-
So I just met yesterday with some folks regarding cameras and with technology updates, everything with as new as it is. They're actually, I haven't got the quote back yet, but they're able to reuse some of our existing cameras in other places and replace where we need to with full 360 view cameras. So it'll make it nicer, but save us some dollars. So we'll actually be able to have more coverage for our money that we're spending.
I typically say there's safety grants, but I know that that's not a reality currently. I think a lot of that money's been pulled at the.
I bet about 7 or 8 years ago, there was a lot of money for school safety, and that's what we upgraded a lot of our cameras, but a lot of cameras aren't gonna last much longer than 7,
And I don't
to
think
10
those
years.
grants are out there like.
No, they aren't.
And we've been working very closely with, Zach and the guys at the police department. They find money where they can as well.
Mhm.
So we're a team.
We did have, just out of some curiosities, TC Networks worked with at the elementary school to look at some of those similar things. I kind of had prioritized and said, here's the things that are kind of pressing that we think would be very helpful. Here's some things that we'd like, just out of curiosity, what would it take? They offered 2 separate quotes, and I don't have them with me. I want to say they were about $5,000 each, just to make some of those same changes that we're talking about. Being able to, we have some of our cameras that are in locations that were areas used for certain purposes in the past. In order to relocate those to make them usable, it takes the time for a technician to do that, to run the wires necessary for it. So like that. So it's pretty minimal, but in order to do it, and if you're going to do a little bit of it at a time, there are other things that you can do. So it was a matter of, well, if you upgraded one camera in this spot, you could reuse that camera maybe somewhere else. You're still having to pay for the cable to get there, somebody to run it, things like that. So that just a ballpark. It certainly wasn't anything extravagant, but just some needs that we looked at in the building to be helpful.
So we're just asking for permission to add that into our language, really like with the referendum as one of the things that goes to.
Yeah, and when you asked me, we have been looking at just some of those priority safety things. What could we do and how would we prioritize that? Just been at that standstill, not knowing what those dollars
No.
are gonna be.
So I'm hearing that's okay to add to the language
Of the
of
referendum.
the referendum.
So what happens if it doesn't pass? We don't get the
Yes, I-
safety stuff, the safety needs.
Couldn't we use the building referendum money versus the operating referendum money for those items? Because we've got money sitting there that can be used.
If that's.
I mean,
the route you want us to go.
I'm furthering Megan's,
I'd like to know a dollar figure.
Question.
I don't know if you're talking about $10,000 or $200,000. And I don't know, I like cameras, but I don't know if they make our students any safer. If that's what we're really talking about, I'd like to know what we're talking about before I would say yes to anything.
I would kind of echo with the capital, only because we could probably get moving sooner. Safety is obviously it's a huge thing, right? I mean, so we could move quicker on that than waiting until April 1st. I guess it's not far off. I'm gonna say that loud, but I mean.
It is not. It's
No,
about a
I
month.
mean, but at least we would know we could do it irregardless. I mean, if we don't have, so.
Well, but we would have the option of, if we put it into the current referendum language and it should pass, then we could have the option of looking into, is there reimbursable expenses through the capital?
The way the referendum language was written, that it would fall in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, Dan raises a good point, because obviously at this point, the shooting that occurred in my granddaughter's school had nothing to do with cameras. Now they have a metal detector and one door only and a policeman. So if that's what you're talking, because that's what somebody suggests that you're gonna do, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right. Yeah, these were one-time expenses, not ongoing that we were talking about. Okay. The next one, the fiscal outlook through 29/30, we'd already covered that in the presentation there, so that was discussion item number D. And then E is items to research and discuss at the next meeting, and we are not going to have a next meeting. So those are all the 5 items that we had for tonight
Before we pull the public comment sheet, just knowing we've had a lot of discussion, can we give a second? Like, if anyone did want to sign in?
There's only like
Okay,
12 of you,
hearing
if
none.
anybody wanted to.
That's a question.
Yeah.
So the last meeting and prior, there was like a 2-year outlook that if we didn't change anything, it would be shut down 2 years. So the dissolution that you mentioned that was talking about that. So that's pushed out to 29/30 would be the negative fund
That's
balance.
when it goes
would be-
negative, yeah.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
if we don't give
Change
any,
anything,
rate,
yes.
if we
Yeah.
don't change anything. So that's
Yes.
operating just like, so that's
Yes,
no
this year-
increases.
Copy and paste it for the next
Yes.
year.
And that's no salary
Yes.
increases
Correct.
for
Yeah,
4
I felt
years.
that, so I know exactly what
Got
this
it.
year felt like, so.
Thank you, Alex.
I think it's important for the community to know something you mentioned here that I just didn't even think about, that it's going to cost, like, the next time if it doesn't pass, the next time we go to referendum, it's going to be a higher referendum. And I think that's a fast, easy message. Like, we have to pass a referendum sometime to keep the school open. It's going to keep getting higher. Fast, easy message. And that, I just didn't think about that.
Anyone else?
We were asked to do a public forum, and I left school early, or I left school at regular time yesterday, and we were contacted later that it was on hold and there were some legalities. We've already put in a lot of time and we're ready to go. We've got things ready to publish. Did you find out anything?
No, I didn't get a hold of our attorney today, but
Okay.
I will come down and talk. You're the lead, right?
Well, we're just really, I'm doing all the, like,
Who should I contact when I
contacting
get
you.
that?
Are you okay with the passion? Are you? Okay.
Very good. We can do that.
All right, because
As long as it's before.
we have March 12th and we haven't put out anything, but we've already talked to a lot of people. So we need to decide. And I would kind of wonder what's different than what you did last year and then what we did this year.
Right, I just want to know, I want to make sure that you guys know all, like when you have a board meeting, there are certain things you have to do. And that's not a normal thing for you guys to do. I want to make sure that we do exactly what you want to in the legal way that we have to run.
Okay.
That's really the concern.
Because it is a listening session. They don't have to answer any questions.
Yeah.
They could actually sit in the bleachers and
Yeah.
people could just go out there.
But again, if they're all here and it's school related, it has to be properly posted that way. And the agenda has to be posted.
I don't know.
So those are the things. We just want to make sure that you guys know, like when we run a meeting like that, these are all the things that we have to do.
Right.
Certainly appreciate your help.
You bet. I think it's important that the community has a chance to speak their mind because that's what's going down now is they're not feeling listened to. And then when they talk to us, it's, you know what I mean? We just need to make sure they're able to speak their minds.
And we have done that a lot, I think. So I feel bad when they say they don't feel like they can speak their mind, because we've had a lot of public comment sessions and there hasn't been a lot of public comment.
I know you have, it's just.
Yeah.
I do hope that if you have people coming to you, please do feel like you can have them reach out to the board as well.
That's kind of
difficult
what I
that
was even
you're-
thinking, even if it was just, we could make a list of the questions and the comments and then just present it to you. We just want you to hear it without a filter.
Can I just offer a small example? I know Angie just had mentioned admin salaries, and she had been hearing that from the public and all that, but then we have decided that's not something that's going to be presented with the information. That's the kind of transparency items that I think the public is wanting, as far as we've asked, but now we're not getting the information. So just offering that as just feedback.
So again, all information is available, all thousands of line items are all available.
I understand
right
that.
now.
Salary of positions. And I think that goes back to Angie's question. The community is hearing stuff and that's what they're telling us.
Yeah.
So we're telling you, yes, we think that needs to be followed up on. I know it's nitpicky, but I just feel like.
And we know that, Heather. And
Yeah.
it's easier
Yeah,
for them
we
to
know
come,
that.
that's easier for them to come to us and complain than it is to look it up, I guess. So if they just want to say it, then.
Because all administrative salaries are all on DPI. I mean,
Yeah.
anybody can look
Right.
it up.
I mean, when people started asking the questions, I did the research because I wanted to know if it was true or not. And, but they don't know how to look that up. And that's why I think you just need to put it out there, say, this is what's happening.
And it's something they've asked for. It's something we
Okay.
should be able to supply without making them go search for it themselves. That's all I'm getting at.
And then they can compare it to the districts and they can compare it to price per student. You know what I mean? That's what we're coming down to. And the number of people that are filling positions. It doesn't sound like, that was the last comment that came up. Well, how many people are in that position? I'm not getting a lot of double digits back, or I'm not getting 2 for this role and 2 for that role. So it goes back to transparency, and that's why I'm going to be here, just because I love seeing this in action, and knowing that our board is working for us. It's been really eye-opening for me. It's different when it's in person and watching it online. I listen to it online all the time, but when you're sitting here and see your faces and your reactions and your expressions, it's a lot different than listening to it when I'm doing my dishes.
During the CISA Board of Control meeting last night, the conversation came up about pay raises, and especially for administrative staff. The comment made by the Dodgeville School Board President, who's the head of the Board of Control, he said, I did a survey of what the administrators are getting paid. And he said, Jamie Nutter, you're in last place by a lot. And he also then went on to basically say that if we had to replace him, and if you guys had to replace your superintendents, you're going to pay more than you do today.
For our
That's
district
something maybe
size, for our district size, that's where it keeps going back to per student. And that's only because it was compared to the district I live in. You know, that's the only reason I looked it up, because I didn't know how much you made. But that's what comes down to. Our community is talking, and we want you to know.
I hear you.
But our first and foremost priority is getting this referendum passed. That
Yes,
needs to be our
exactly.
focal point in our conversations, and
Yeah.
just people in the community ask questions and we get clarification out to community members. Just coming back to, we really need to focus on this referendum. We need to get this passed, or we need it for our kids, and that should really be
That's right.
the conversations.
Alrighty, if there's no other public comment, I would move to go to closed session for 1985 1F to consider and take action as appropriate personal histories of specific persons which, if discussed in public, would likely have a substantial adverse effect upon the reputation of such persons, specifically reviewing and discussing confidential student information and open conditional enrollment.
I will second.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for giving us time to ask questions and comments afterwards.
No, thank you for coming.
Yep, I appreciate it.
Roll call?
Joel,